Ahoy! Joe Buddy Hambone here, and I'm back again with a brand new coupon code from our friends over at Noble Knight Games. This month, it's going to be Love RPGs, and it's going to be running now all the way through Valentine's Day. So you can get $5 off any order of $25 or more, either online or in person over at Noble Knight Games. Now, there has never been a better time than right now, especially if we're still hanging out at home to pick up some more games to play with our friends and family. So swing on by to nobleknight.com and pump in the code LOVERPGs and get $5 off any order over $25 or more. And don't forget, Noble Knight has a killer trade-in program, so if you've got some older games that you're just not feeling anymore, or if you just need to make some space for some brand new ones, Noble Knight's got you covered. So if you're shopping over at Noble Knight Games between now and Valentine's Day, make sure you use the code LOVERPGs. That's LOVERPGS to get $5 off any order of $25 or more from our friends over at Noble Knight Games.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the editor-in-chief of Unwinnable.com. We're already 2 weeks into this new year, and it's already a sequel, Stu Horvath.
Hi, Hambone. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. How you doing today?
Slightly irradiated.
Oh, no. Stu, why don't you tell our listeners what we're going to talk about today?
Well, if they're good listeners, they already know because they listened last week. We're talking about Gamma World.
I'm so excited about this.
So, man, Gamma World. I love and also know very little about Gamma World.
Wasn't this a suggestion from one of our patrons?
People have been really curious as to why we haven't covered Gamma World for a long time, both on the podcast and the Instagram. And it's literally that I never really owned it in any of its iterations as a kid. I'm not like super conversant in it, but I've always thought it was cool.
Did you get your new copies from our friends over at Noble Knight Games?
I got some of them from Noble Knight, yes.
Very cool.
I got the first one in that big collection that I bought last year. We're going to kind of cover the first edition and then sort of gloss over the next editions. I do kind of want to go and do episodes on the specific ones because they're all weird and different, but we're going to just concentrate on first edition here and then kind of gloss through the rest. So the first edition comes out in 1978, and it's a spiritual successor to Metamorphosis Alpha, which is what we covered last week. Also by James M. Ward, with a co-writer credit on Gamma World is Gary Jackett. And it's basically the same setup as Metamorphosis Alpha, except instead of being on a ship, you're in a post-nuclear apocalyptic United States. The apocalypse happened, 300, 400 years ago. Everything is ruined, and you are going off in search of technology to make yourself more powerful, more safe, and to help your community. And that's basically it. It's a transition of setting. And the rules are basically similar to Metamorphosis Alpha, where it is essentially an OD&D hack in which you don't have the traditional character classes or level progression. Your progression is measured by the technology that you find. And technology is a little bit more robust. There's definitely a greater risk of mutation. The mutation system is hilarious.
Tell me more.
So everything's like mutated. Like there are like pure strain humans who are resistant to radiation. I think in this edition they can mutate, and later editions they cannot. They're just entirely immune in later editions. But I think in this one they still can. So basically, if you get into like a radiation zone, like you can spontaneously mutate. And the spontaneous mutations are ridiculous. Like basically any kind of animal on Earth, there's a chance that it's a bipedal culture group or has been horrifically mutated into something out of a nightmare. Like there's centistedes.
Say what?
Yes, centistedes. They're horses that have elongated to make room for their 16 legs. That's 8 pairs.
That's awesome.
They look ridiculous.
Oh, I bet they do.
There's hoops, which are gigantic bunny men that for some reason they can change steel into rubber as if by magic.
So you basically go from a claymore to a Nerf sword.
Yeah, I mean, totally. No real explanation for this given. It's just like that's their ability. And those are sort of the existing mutants, and anything can mutate further. Mutated humans, when you roll up a character, you roll a certain set of mutations. And mutations aren't always good. There's like a whole bunch of bad ones too. So like I would say like 30% chance, having looked at the tables, that like you're gonna roll a suite of mutations that suck. And make your character like pathetic and unplayable, which is kind of awesome. But like a really strange design choice, because like eventually you're going to push the player to just pick a couple, and like your randomness thing is going to go out the window if the frustration gets high enough. So you have things like attraction odor or chameleon powers or density control, or then you have like weak lungs. Multiple body parts.
So wait, weak lungs is one of the mutations?
Yeah. No resistance to poison, no sensory nerve endings, so you don't feel anything. You can have wings or you can have a vision defect. There's no prerequisites. It's like one mutation just happens on top of the other one. It doesn't matter. You could mutate into like this horrific primal mass of just screaming life after a while, I guess.
So you could basically have the most badass character walking around town, and you accidentally step in a pile of goo, and the next thing you know...
You turn into that goo.
Oh my God.
Yes. Making matters more interesting, there is mental mutations as well as physical mutations. So you have a psionic system, basically. And I can't undersell the artwork in the rulebook. It's Trampier.
Love it.
Yeah. But he just totally leans into the ridiculous mutations. Like the one that I'm looking at right now is like a stumpy kind of like hippo man with like antenna and like a long bison tail and wings. And he's sort of leaping over a wall. It looks absolutely ridiculous. Like the obnoxious Saturday morning cartoon character in like the fantasy show.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can imagine him sitting there having drawn, like, so much fantasy stuff, like traditional fantasy stuff. And they're like, hey, man, let's get weird. And him being like, okay. Challenge accepted. Because I've seen some of the art from this book, and it is awesome looking because it's Trampier. And at the same time, it's just like, what kind of milkshake did you drink before you went to bed and woke up and draw that, dude? Because that is weird.
We should pause for a second and discuss the cover art. I've always loved the first edition cover art. It's about a bunch of like Kmart G.I. Joes looking at the ruins of a city, and there is a field of what appears to be glowing radiation between them and the city. And I've always loved it. I've loved the color palette, and I'm looking at it closely, and I think that maybe he did this partially in crayon, which gives it like a really like grainy, fuzzy look that really sells the idea of like a radiation saturated atmosphere.
It really does look like that. Now that you say it, I can't unsee it.
They might be colored pencils on a high tooth kind of paper, but it has like this grainy quality to it that I really love. And it's probably the most serious thing in the whole game. Like it doesn't do a good job of selling the silliness that is at the heart of Gamma World. It just sort of takes all of the stuff about the post-apocalypse. There's less of it in 78 than there is now. Like it's a couple years before Mad Max even. So our preconceived notions about the post-apocalyptic, like the visuals and aesthetic and thematic choices about it sort of get set in stone, I think, over the 80s.
Right.
And it's still Jell-O now. And Gamma World sort of owns its influences and sort of embraces the silliness of it all. The whole thing with technology is philosophically the same as Metamorphosis Alpha, where you're going out and you're finding, buried old tech from the world before, right? But in this game, there's more of a system for how you learn how to use it or what it is. So like you, the player, might know or have a hunch, but there's actually a system that you have to butt up against to access that information. And it's basically these flowcharts where you're rolling dice a number of times over a period of time. So you can kind of tinker with something for a long time before you figure out what it is. That's kind of fantastic because like you might be tinkering with like a can of spray paint, or you could be tinkering with a landmine, and like you could accidentally roll like you learn by catastrophic failure and the thing goes off,
Yeah, nothing like learning the hard way in an RPG.
I love that. I love the idea of just like some weird mutant guy finds a grenade in the dirt and he's just like, I don't know what this is. Let me roll and see if I can figure it out. And then he pulls the pin and blows himself up. It's so beautiful. Like, I want that in a movie. It's probably, that feels like a background gag in a Mad Max movie.
It's definitely a background gag in some movie from the 80s. I mean, I think when I started playing D&D and I got into RPGs and I was a little more precious about my characters and I cared more about their survival and their story and all that, I was like, probably not ever going to be comfortable playing a game of Gamma World. Now, years later, where I am more about having fun and trying to pop my friends, I would love this. I am confident I would love to sit down and play a game of Gamma World and be like, man, what's this button for? Boom. Like, that sounds so appealing to me because that, to me, sounds like you're going to be more apt to creating, like, great stories and wild memories by letting chaos reign supreme.
Yep. Failures are always more interesting than successes, which I think is like an indie game kind of design pillar, but totally. And there's a couple other things that Gamma World does first. Like Metamorphosis Alpha, there's no definition to the world. Like, the framework is presented to you, but like the details are up to your group, your dungeon master, your players to sort of collaborate and define. They take this to new heights in Gamma World, in which you have a gigantic map of the United States with the ruins of cities are marked, the mountain ranges are marked, and the new coastline, because of sea level rising, is marked. But otherwise, it's completely blank. So you have complete freedom to fill in the map however you want. This is sort of TSR holding on to that idea of, like, players don't want prefab worlds. They want to make their own thing. That's why we're not going to make, adventures and campaign worlds. And then, like, at this point, they're like, okay, we're going to make adventures and campaign worlds, but we're going to leave a lot of it open so that you can fill in the details. They'll continue to do this into the 80s. The Forgotten Realms box set is maybe the last campaign setting that has this wide open world where the map is actually empty. And you can see that they totally decide to jettison that by the time the second edition of Forgotten Realms comes out. But this happens a couple times. Like, Lankmar City of Adventure uses empty space as a design choice. Greyhawk, the original Greyhawk map folio, Gygax leaves whole swaths of it open and, like, says, like, fill it out. I don't hate that as a design choice, but I also see why it died out, because, like, that's not what anybody really wants, I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people want for that to come back, but I don't think so. I think that people want a whole thing that they can kind of tinker with and discard as they see fit.
I think that shifts throughout the years, and with people's priorities, with people's ability to have time to play games, the way people play games now. I mean, let's face it, we are now in the Discord Roll20 generation of people playing RPGs. It's not your granddad's RPG sitting around a table, hanging out, eating some pizza with your buddies. It's, well, we have this amount of time on this night to play a game. We're going to put our headphones on and we are going to use this dice rolling app. Like, the world changes and the world evolves, and I can honestly see where the first thought of, just leave it open world, people are going to like that, pivoting to, we just need to send complete maps out to people because they probably don't want to think about it. Like, I can see how it changes and evolves over time as the game evolves over time and how the fans evolve and change over time and their priorities shift. But you know what? If you got someone who's psyched on it, they'll find a way to make whatever work.
Things go in and out and come back in fashion. Bell bottoms turn into bootcut jeans. Like, things come and go. And the same is true of role-playing game systems and design stuff. Everything's a fad or a fashion, and there's a cycle to all of this. The other thing that I think Gamma World does first and interesting is it lays out factions. They're called Cryptic alliances here. It's pretty rudimentary in the first edition, and it gets expanded upon in later editions. But, like, this is the first time that this kind of faction crawl thing becomes possible. Most of them are sort of, single-minded political action groups. Like, your purebred radiation-resistant humans, of course, have an organization that wants to have, purebred radiation-resistant humans kill everybody else. And mutant humans have an organization that's similar. And all of these groups have, like, the supremacist organization running around trying to kill people. But then there's, like, weird stuff. They're called the Ranks of the Fit. They're like a fascist militia founded by a mutant bear who, during his time in the wasteland, has read Mein Kampf, Animal Farm, and several biographies of Napoleon Bonaparte. There's an illustration of him later in the later edition where he's, like, in the tricorn hat, hand in the breast of the... It's so ridiculous.
That sounds bonkers, man. They actually wrote that in there, that he read Mein Kampf and Animal Farm?
That is a direct quote, yes.
What year did this come out?
78.
That tracks.
It is one of the earliest and funniest RPGs. I'm not a naturally funny person, I think, so I feel like I'm just naturally going to undersell the ridiculousness of, like, but when I say it's ridiculous, it's ridiculous. There's a Napoleon bear running around reading Mein Kampf.
What a world we live in.
Yeah. So the first edition, like, gets 2 adventures and then that's it. And then the second edition comes out and it has a badass cover and, like, they change some rules and it gets 2 adventures and then that's it. And then the third edition comes out and that one gets like 4 or 5 adventures and then that's it. This game keeps coming out with new editions, and I think there's 7 formal editions. The last one I think was 2010. It was still under like the 3E system, and they all sort of reflect the D&D of the time, of the moment. One of the last editions is like the 5th, I think, and it comes out as a setting book for the Alternity line a month after Wizards of the Coast canceled the Alternity line. Like, how does this happen? Again, TSR not knowing what they have or how to do their properties justice. Like, they just keep throwing out new editions. Every time they put out a new edition, too, it's a new reason for the apocalypse. The first edition is the only one that has a nuclear apocalypse. Future editions, they all have like nanobots in one, and like I think there's aliens in one. All of it is ridiculous. It's ridiculous that it has to like go through all of these weird metamorphoses over time. I think Jonathan Tweet did like a dungeon article called Omega World, and it's like, you know, I don't know, 5 pages, 6 pages, and that's actually considered better than the D20 version that I think is the 6th edition.
In fairness, most things are better than any D20 edition of anything.
Oh yeah, D20 was a disaster. But then, yeah, like there's the 7th and final edition was card-based mechanics. So like it was a collectible card game on top of it. It's just like, stop. Just give me Gamma World. Give me a whole bunch of adventures. But of course, in this wonderful age of hacks and, you know, retro gaming, Gamma World lives on, even though it's not really called Gamma World anymore. There's several games that kind of take the ideas of the setting and apply them to different systems. Most notably is Mutant Crawl Classics from Goodman Games. They bring that whole gonzo energy that they have from Dungeon Crawl Classics into the Mutant Crawl Classics, and it's just such a natural, beautiful, wonderful fit for like how the absurdity of Gamma World.
Yeah, man. I mean, something like as gonzo as Dungeon Crawl Classics and Gamma World seems to me like chocolate and peanut butter, 2 great flavors that go great together.
Totally. And there is much love for Mutant Crawl Classics. You know, I think that that's sort of where you're going to get your Gamma World fix from now on.
Right on, man. Stu, do you have any final thoughts on Gamma World?
My final thought is that, man, I wish TSR had gotten their crap together. There's so much good stuff in all of these editions. We'll probably do an episode down the line that looks at each individual edition, or at least the first couple, because there's so many good ideas, but they also do like their damnedest to break every edition. It's ridiculous. So, and kind of illuminating when you dig into it and look at it all in one big, majestic conspiracy board. You just kind of can't help but shake your head at TSR.
Very cool, Stu. Well, folks, this is another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG, where every day, Hambone, I'm posting stuff about Gamma World and games like it. Every day. It never stops. It's like 4 years now.
Well, keep them coming, Stu.
Do I sound like it doesn't spark joy anymore?
Oh, I know it does. I know you're just selling for the audience right now. You can find me on the Twitter, where I will not sell for the audience as much, at Hambreaker. I tweet about board games. I tweet about cute animals. I tweet about Dungeons and Dragons. You can follow my day-to-day adventures in podcasting and in life over on Instagram at John Hambone McGuire. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. And if you really like the podcast, think about joining our Patreon, patreon.com/vintagerpg. We've got some great behind-the-scenes looks at the book that Stu is writing. We've got some great behind-the-scenes looks at 321 Action, my new game that's coming out this year. We've also got some videos. We've got a great Discord community, early release episodes, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.